guys? Welcome back to the Order in Progress podcast. This is your host, Will Safford. Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you are enjoying the podcast, I ask that you subscribe on iTunes or YouTube. We have both the video version and the audio version available to you. So we ask that you just subscribe, and we'll continue to pump out some awesome content for grapplers and jiu-jitsu athletes. In today's episode, we have Mark DiSalvo. Mark is a strength and conditioning coach who coaches out of New York City. And Mark is very knowledgeable when it comes to strength and conditioning. He has coached a lot of the Marcelo Garcia black belts, including Marcus Tinoco and Matheus Lutes. And Mark himself is a blue belt and really is very experienced when it comes to strength and conditioning for combat athletes. He actually traveled the world with Steve Maxwell. He was kind of Steve's protege for a while and came up under him. If you don't know who Steve Maxwell is, he is one of the first guys to teach kettlebells in the United States. Steve was also one of the first American black belts in jiu-jitsu and is really a top world famous strength and conditioning fitness coach. So I had a really good discussion with Mark DiSalvo on just his progression through the years and what he's learned, starting with the kettlebell, moving into weight training, and just kind of experimenting with different modalities to get athletes in the best possible shape and really get their performance to peak for jiu-jitsu competition. So have a really good podcast coming up for you guys today. If you want, check us out at seekprogress.com. We're on Instagram at seek.progress. And if you go to seekprogress.com, we have a free ebook, actually a few free ebooks for you guys. One's a mobility ebook that's got my favorite mobility exercises to prevent injury for jiu-jitsu. And we just dropped a 4-week body weight conditioning program that will help you get your body, your mind, your lungs, your heart in shape for jiu-jitsu. So be sure to check that out at seekprogress.com. And without further ado, let's get into the latest episode with Mark DiSalvo. All right, so here we are with Mark DiSalvo. Mark, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you, man?
I'm great, making the best of these crazy times that we're in. And I know that you, when things are normal, you have a studio in New York City where you train kind of like the whole gamut of people, but you specialize in training jiu-jitsu athletes, right?
That's correct. Yeah. I've been at the current location, which is DiSalvo Performance Training's first standalone facility it'll be a year actually tomorrow, because June 1st, it'll be the 1-year anniversary that will be sort of bittersweet and strange. But, 4 years before that, we were downtown, and a good friend of mine, Reset Physical Therapy, Dr. Peter Wong, we had a joint setup where it was just it was like the size of like a large bedroom. Half the place was a PT clinic. The other half had a rack and some jiu-jitsu mats, actually, some Dolomer mats. Uh-huh. And that was where we trained. So yeah, I've been really into training jiu-jitsu athletes since about the founding of the business, like 2015, just because it's a really now maybe not so much, but at the time it was a really underserved market of athletes and just pool of athletes, I should say, just people who took their sport very seriously. And they're all people who are, and still to this day it's changing, but they generally are people who don't make a lot of money from training, and like even as professional athletes. Yeah. And I always was drawn to amateur sports at the highest level, and even professional sports in individual sports like Olympic sports. So there was like something I saw there with jiu-jitsu athletes that there was like a affinity or like an affection I had for them. And because of that, because it's more or less, they train like Olympic athletes. I mean, at the highest levels. And now, like I said, it's changing. They have the ability to make more of a living. But yeah, that was a big interest. And then also just me practicing jiu-jitsu. I started somewhere about 2014 or 2013, somewhere in there. So I got a firsthand look, at, what you go through. And I started at Marcelo Garcia Academy. So I got to see, this is when Bernardo Faria had just started teaching there. It was before he won his world title. The double gold that year. I think it was 2017. So, I got to see him prepare every day, and he was my main teacher. So I got to see his work ethic. So it was like a very powerful place to see examples of people who are, doing things, doing them right. It was a good environment to be in.
Awesome, man. Yeah. The guys in Marcelo Garcia, that is the place to be, man. Those guys go super hard. You've got the best jiu-jitsu. I mean, Matheus, Denise just won ADCC, took first place in the crazy division, 88 kilos, man. You've got the absolute best in the world. So no better place to get exposure to jiu-jitsu than Marcelo's.
Definitely. Yeah. It's a special place too. I mean, over the years, so many different people come in, and you get to talk to a lot of and interact with a lot of people, not just in jiu-jitsu, but in MMA, and then even just outside of sports. You get some really interesting input. I've met some of my best friends and also like business colleagues, advisors, just people I trust with different like facets of my life to give me advice. I met a lot of them there just because it has a gravitational pull of sorts. It's a different place. And yeah, just really learned a lot. It is special.
Funny story. Like you say, the network, I actually randomly ran into Tim Ferriss one day at the airport.
Cool.
And I know Tim is good friends with Josh Waitskin, who is the co-owner of Marcelo Garcia Academy in New York City. And Tim, we were just talking, and I was telling him about how I had this shoulder injury, and he tells me, "Oh man, you got to start kettlebell training." I said, "Oh, kettlebell training. Okay." And I kind of heard about kettlebells. This was 2010. And then I started getting into kettlebells, and that's kind of what got my path into strength and conditioning.
Nice.
But I know that you're a kettlebell guy. That's kind of your specialty, right?
Yeah. One of them, it's kind of funny. So there's a long story there. Which is good because this is a podcast where people come for stories. Yeah. So my introduction to kettlebells, I honestly can't even remember where I got my first one, but I do remember getting it somewhere in the middle of Brooklyn and lugging it on the train and bringing it home. Like at a Modell's or something somewhere. And it was very weird at the time because they were made of concrete and they were just crap. They weren't nice to use at all. Unless you ordered them from at that time, RKC, which they used to do all the classes, the certifications. And because of that, following their stuff and whatnot, eventually I ended up meeting Steve Maxwell, who was a big, he was one of the people in the early part of kettlebell's introduction to North America. It was him, Pavel Satsul, and a few other names. But Steve was on the road for RKC, doing tons and tons of seminars all the time. That's kind of his history with it. And, he knew a lot about kettlebells, obviously, and he was still doing certifications and whatnot. I had interviewed him for a podcast. So I did a podcast back from maybe 2013 until about 2016. It was called Functional Meatheads. And we interviewed him for it. And he gave I knew he was one of the first 12 black belts, American black belts in jiu-jitsu. And we started talking about jiu-jitsu. We kept in touch because we just got along just on jiu-jitsu, on strength and conditioning. At that time, there weren't many people interested in exercise, like in the field of exercise science and whatnot, who were interested in jiu-jitsu and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So he eventually asked me to come assist him on different seminars. And so I got to teach kettlebells with him all over the world. Wow. And I was his protege as apprentice. Basically, he sort of took me under his wing, taught me a lot. We went to Mjolnir in Iceland. That was probably one of the most memorable like kettlebell like trainings we did. It was like a week or like it was more than 7 days of training the staff at Mjolnir. And Mjolnir is a MMA camp that was started in Iceland, co-started, if I'm not mistaken, by Gunnar Nelson in the UFC, and his father, as like a place to sort of be like a hub for MMA in Iceland. And I love Iceland. So it was like amazing to go there and work with everybody there. And so basically, like, from Steve is where I like really took the deep dive in the kettlebells. But and after a certain amount of time, like anything, I think you get a little, I don't want to say burned out, but if you're being inquisitive about what you do, you want to ask questions about like, is this the most effective way to train? And
sure.
Like what else is out there? Cause I was just having this conversation the other day with somebody that there was a time in fitness, strength and conditioning and whatnot, where people were always like butting heads. It was just like kettlebell versus barbell versus whatever. And everyone was like trying to say that this like Olympic weightlifting is bad for you. It's going to hurt you. And like, it was all this just like crap, just people were flinging at one another. But now there's so much good information out there that people realize how in little parts, and there's less infighting. And now it's more of like a business. People just want customers, and they want you to show up to their certifications and, buy their books. And I mean that in an altruistic way, like, or a slightly more altruistic way. There's just less venom, which is nice.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to navigate that quietly. And so like, cause a lot of people knew me for kettlebells, and I went and studied a lot with powerlifting. I went and learned a lot about like strength training, like how to build real strength, like just raw numbers, just, you start at like a 225 deadlift, get you in a certain amount of years to 500 plus, 600 plus, that kind of strength. And a big mentor of mine there was Matt Wenning. And Westside Barbell and just a lot of other paths I took. But now with everything going on, it kind of took me full circle, because I love kettlebells because they kind of like democratize fitness in a lot of ways. You can kind of do almost anything. Like the only thing you really will have a hard time with kettlebells is training very heavy, unless you have like some crazy, ridiculous kettlebell, which I've seen. And I think that kettlebells are really effective for grapplers, and we usually are drawn towards them because there's like a commonality, like when you get deep into a circuit with kettlebells, it sort of feels the same as like deep into a roll with someone who's real tough, or, is matching your skill and you're getting tired. It's very interactive. It's very heady. It's also very physical. So I know I kind of took and ran with your question there, but yeah, I'm a big fan of kettlebells. I'm a big fan of kettlebells, especially in applying them the right way. I don't think they're the cure-all to everything, but when you're in the conditions we're in now, where most people can't use the gym or go to the gym or train jiu-jitsu, it's pretty damn close. Like, it's the only thing that's probably going to challenge you the way that you want to be challenged from a gas tank energy systems perspective. And then even from like a strength endurance perspective, it's like on par with anything else, in my opinion, that you can do. So I think they're a great tool. And if you use them wisely, it's like anything else. You have very little risk for injury. I don't believe that they're inherently dangerous or anything like that.
Yeah, totally. I definitely think it's important to learn how to properly use a kettlebell, because that encounter with Tim Ferriss, I immediately went out, bought a 45-pound kettlebell, which was like way too heavy to start with if you've never used kettlebells before. I picked the thing up, and then it goes right over my shoulder, and I like screwed up my shoulder and never touched the thing for like 6 months.
Right.
So, but once you know how to use a kettlebell, I agree. For jiu-jitsu, for combat athletes, I think they're awesome. And I'm big on minimalism, so I don't like having a ton of tools, having to use all these different things. Like, if I can get what I need out of the kettlebell, then like that's even better, because I don't need as much equipment. And like you're saying, right now, everyone's stuck at home in small spaces. Kettlebell is perfect thing to have right now.
Yeah, there's like kind of two things I would say with that too, is that, you know, to your earlier point, I think as long as you're very clear on what your goal is, it almost doesn't matter what tool you use. I mean, of course it matters. Like you're not going to get certain, like a power lifter is going to have trouble if they never touch a barbell. Like, you know, someone who trains jiu-jitsu is going to have trouble if they never have another human to roll with, you know, like that's, or drill with, that's a problem. Yep. But if you know what you want to do, like if you know what you're trying to build, if you know that you know, you're trying to improve like your aerobic capacity, like you can use a kettlebell to train with that. You can use a barbell to train with that. So, like minimalism in anything is great as long as you understand like what you're trying to accomplish, because you don't need a lot of tools if you know what you're trying to do. But then sometimes it's like, oh crap, like I need to build my like vertical pull. Like I probably need a pull-up bar or a lat pull down. Like that would be an example of like, oh, we got to expand a little. But yeah, I think, I can't remember the second part of what you said, but there was something I
think you covered it. Yeah. So I think we both agree kettlebells have their place and they're definitely useful for the combat athlete or the grappler. But, what do you find that you mostly use, like when you're training strength and conditioning for one of your jiu-jitsu athletes? What are the things that or the methods that you use to get them to where they need to be?
The thing that there's not really one thing I use the most, but the thing that the quality that I find that most lack, and I'm not talking about like the elite, because like elite athletes generally are where they're at because they are complete athletes. Like they take care of their bodies. They've had time to mature in their sport. They've had time to mature into their bodies. There's exceptions. There's always exceptions to that. There's people who are like, might be like very physically lacking in one quality, but excel, you know, at jiu-jitsu. But overwhelmingly, I find that there's usually a strength issue, and I equate strength to like range of motion issues too, because I think a lot of people will sometimes confuse people's mobility deficiencies for like a mobility problem, and they'll just like sit and crank and wrench on things and like just do these protocols over and over and over again, not really get anywhere. Or they'll just get like a little bit. Whereas like if you taught somebody, if you look and identify some key weaknesses, and I have like a matrix, like an assessment I do where I look at different strength standards. And if somebody is really far away from those strength standards, invariably they always have a problem. There's always like something they're complaining about, or they come to me and they've written me an email about, or there's a reason they're there training. So like strength always matters. It's at the bottom of that, like what I call like an athletic development pyramid. There's a lot of people who kind of use that model. And if you don't have certain strength norms, you just, I mean, in a contact sport, and a heavy contact sport, which jiu-jitsu is a combat sport, you don't have the ability to brace for anything that's coming your way. Like you have to be able to, you have to have brakes, number one, especially if you're explosive sort of naturally. If you have that sort of build and that sort of tendency, you have to be able to slow yourself down. And you also have to be able to take punishment. Part of that just comes from being on the mats too. But strength is like the first place I usually start with, because it's such low hanging fruit. It's easy to train if you know solid strength programming. And then once that's out of the way, like we assess, it's very individual. There are, of course, are issues of mobility that will pop up that you have to address. Other times it's a gas tank thing. But a lot of times when it comes to endurance on the mats, it's usually, I don't find that once you hit a certain level, people usually have that problem. It's more of the people who complain about that up to a certain level are usually, they're doing something like really wrong, or there's some other factor. Like they might be a little overweight, or their technique is not great, and they will admit that to you, you know, or their breathing mechanics are really bad. That's another big one too. Breathing is huge. That people have to understand how they should be using their breath as a control mechanism to make sure that you're not like over innervating yourself to prematurely. Like if you're rolling with Matheus Diniz, or if you're rolling with Matheus Lutes or John Satava, like you're going to tap into that deep gas tank, and that's when you should. But if you're rolling with me, that's not supposed to happen. Like if you're better than me, you know what I mean? Like I can't push you like that. So, that kind of thing. So that's where we look at that too.
Before we get into the energy systems development, getting back to strength.
Please.
I think Dan John was the one who was like, strength is the quality that all the other qualities are built off of.
Mm-hmm.
So setting that foundation for strength will set you up for all the other things that you need to build, and whatever that is that you need, if it's, endurance training or your aerobic training, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any standards that you kind of have in your mind, like off the top of your head, that like, okay, you should be able to do this much?
That's a great question. So that Dan John statement, there's a lot of people who Dan John's like a great synthesizer of information. He's very smart and thinks about things very complexly, but he expresses himself very simply. And I think that that's a beautiful skill. That pyramid is sort of what you want to sort of build. And in that pyramid also is basic aerobics. So like one of those standards off the top of my head would be like, if you are somebody who has trouble running a mile, and this is just, obviously it's slightly objective, but it's something I would use, like that's an issue. Like that's something you should be able to and I don't care how long it takes you. Honestly, this is not like a speed issue, but I just want to know, do you have the capacity to not be dry heaving, for running for a mile? Cause that's for most people going to be under 10 minutes, that's an aerobic standard. I would feel like a lot of people need, because jiu-jitsu does have a big aerobic component. I also look a lot at I've always screened, and I use what I call indicator lifts. This concept was taught to me by Charles Poliquin, and he figured out, this is kind of how he would program for all sports, is he would figure out lifts that were most indicative of decent or good performance in that sport. So it doesn't mean that like you're an amazing back squatter and now you're going to be an amazing sprinter. It just, there's a high correlation. You see something there. For that, I've changed mine for jiu-jitsu a little bit over the years. One I look at a lot is deadlifts. So if an adult male is having trouble around 225, like that shouldn't be like, you should be able to deadlift 225 comfortably for reps. Not 20 reps, but I would just want to see you do 3 sets of 5, whatever, that type of thing. And I know some people might feel a little strange about that, but if you think the average adult man is probably going to be anywhere between 180 and, maybe 200, like 210, like that's going to be a little bit more than your body weight. And I think that's a reasonable standard. And usually when people don't have that, they're having some of those achy pain type of questions. Another one that I used to use a lot, and I think is very good for grip strength and very good for an indication of your shoulder health, is how long you can hang from a bar. That's another thing I will do with a lot of people. I'll see where their hang time is. If you're, for something like jiu-jitsu, under like 30 seconds, to me, that's really problematic, unless you of course have something, again, these are loose, like certain individuals will come in and they'll have had like shoulder surgery or something. And obviously we have to adjust for it. Another one I'd use too is a 1 or a 3 RM pull-up. So like how much weight you can do. Now, if someone can't do a pull-up at all, that's a big problem for me, like that for a sport like jiu-jitsu. Unless there's like a really good reason. And then more recently, I've been experimenting a lot with, and I've always put a lot of squatting patterns into people's programs, but I've experimented a lot more recently with back squats or safety bar squats as a standard too, because maybe not so much a standard, I would say. This is just something I've been working on, is that I noticed in myself that because I've been spending the past year and a half really building up my back squat. It was my worst lift, and I was trying to learn everything about it. And I went to some of the best people in the world to teach me how to squat and squat better. And as my back squat numbers went up, I felt like on the mat, I was never getting out muscled. I was just like, I felt like my base was better. I felt like I only got swept when people were, and this is anecdotal, this is purely anecdotal. I was only getting swept when people were better than me, like, and things like that. That like, it was not because I was like, oh, he's strong and this happened. It was, and then I started, without even telling people that, I started mixing back squats into programs, all variations too, like heels elevated, safe, like I said, safety bar, flat, wide stance, all kinds of things. And watching people's numbers slowly go up, some of the athletes I work with, not saying a word to them, like why I was doing it. There's people who had worked with a while, and they all said, hey, my base felt better. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of reasons and things I've studied, different coaches who are really big on back squatting for athletes. You know, whether it's Fred Hatfield or Cal Dietz and some of these people. Cal Dietz in particular, he's a famous coach at the University of Minnesota, I believe, oversees all the strength and conditioning and has for like a decade plus of their hockey and I think football teams too. But he looks at the squat as a very reactive thing that you have to, and it's true. The deadlift, for example, is all starting strength. Like you have to generate the strength and tension to pull the bar off the ground. There is no eccentric groove that gets you ready for it. If you ever watch people deadlift who aren't like powerlifters, their first rep on the deadlift does not look as good as their second and third. Probably by the third or the fourth, that's the clean reps. It's the first rep off the floor where you have to start and get all that strength. You have to create all that tension. There's no eccentric loading. So the deadlift I like as a raw strength test. And then the squat though has the eccentric first. You're coming down and then you're reversing it. And I think there's something very powerful in people being able to reverse their body's direction under load. I think just at a basic level. And I think that and understanding your center of gravity in order to do that, because you have to be very efficient. Once the bar starts getting really heavy, you can't waste movement. And that's jiu-jitsu too. You can't waste movement. You can't be like you just, like, that's the reason you drill. Like, that's the reason you become more effective. It will help your gas tank. So the back squat, I think, feeds into that. And I think this is something that Matt Wenning really put in perspective for me, is that when you are an athlete, you want to think less of like, I'm an ex-athlete. I'm a jiu-jitsu athlete. I'm a football player. I'm a hockey player. Just like, are you a balanced human? Like, do you have these abilities? Are you like a generally good athlete? And this is something that in the East, in Russia and the former Soviet countries, this was how they developed all their athletes. And they put a lot of money and they had a lot of bodies that went into this. And a lot of it has been translated since the 90s. And there's a lot of it that comes out all the time. And they're usually like 40, like these things might've been written in the 80s, some of them in the 70s, but they're still ahead of or on par with what our studies find out now. So that was a little bit of a run on, but these are like important things I think about with these sorts of things. You want to have, like I said, there's a certain standard of strength you need to have in a sport where your goal is to manhandle somebody. So to think that strength is not a part of jiu-jitsu is silly, in my opinion.
100%. That was awesome information, man. I personally, I've always had lower back problems, so I've shied away from the back squats, and I've really done more front squatting, which I've always recommended to jiu-jitsu athletes because of what it does for the core. But the back squat, I did do a period of like heavy back squatting for some time, and the back squat hits your entire body, unlike the front squat does, and really unlike any other lift. Yeah. It's just, the whole system is involved with the back squat. And you absolutely feel that when you're on the mat. Like
Yeah.
you're just stronger all over. Everyone thinks squatting is for your legs. No. The back squat hits the whole. I mean, your upper back from holding that thing up on the rack,
Yeah.
right? Your
Mm-hmm.
core, your legs, your glutes, your calves.
Yeah, definitely.
Posture.
One thing that's really underrated in like to that point is torso thickness. And like when you are constantly under the bar or when you're loading your spine, your body has no choice but to hypertrophy the fibers of your torso. And that's really beneficial for jiu-jitsu too. Like that's something that a lot of people could benefit from in the sport, even just at an amateur level. Because the thing is a lot of the pros and a lot of the people who are about to turn pro, they've kind of already got that covered. Yeah. So for everyone listening who like is like the rest of us, like there is value in that. There is value in loading the spine. It doesn't always have to be like a killer, and you might have done it too much or you might have done it incorrectly in the past, and that's why there's an issue. But you also bring up a good point too, because one of the issues is that like back squats and even front squats. I mean, I love front squats too. I think it's a great exercise. One of the problems with both of them is that there's like a technique period, like where you sort of have to like get good at it before you can really start to load it. And there's still times where you can get that benefit of strength, like from just a lot of reps that are really low and sub max, just to build that baseline strength or just that skill. But a lot of times like people don't, and I get this because like this is the thing that like there's the ideal. Like when I was a younger person, a younger coach, I would always be like, why don't they do this? Like I see these programs and these guys are like, why aren't they doing this? That's so ineffective. And then you realize sometimes fighters and people contact you and they have 5 weeks. There's like people who have contacted me for like, like tryouts with professional basketball teams. And they're like, I have it in 4 weeks or I have whatever. And it's like, you don't always have time. And it's like, all right, it's going to take me 4 weeks to teach this dude how to squat. Like, how can we get a very similar result in another way? Yeah. So you always have to be very adaptable. And I think like finding the squat variation that works for the athlete is good. And one thing that has been a game changer, in my opinion, is the ubiquity now of safety squat bars, because you put a safety squat bar on somebody, they're going to understand right away what they have to do with it. There's so much less like bar on your back skill. Like you mentioned, there's so much less. Because honestly, I've been back squatting, I don't even know if you can count my teenage years because they was just so bad. But like, I've been back squatting for a long time, like a decade, but let's just say seriously now for about 2.5 years, like on a program with the pro. And that's still my weakness, is like keeping the thoracic spine where it needs to be with the bar and not getting beat by it. And with the safety squat bar, it's like that goes away, or at least you understand intuitively how you have to push into it. And it's very safe. Especially if you have spotter arms and all these other things on your rack or whatever. But that to me is a game changer. I use that with just about everybody, like who can do that. But yeah, lower back stuff can be a concern sometimes. So, you want to train accordingly or find the right modifications.
Well, that's a huge tip in itself, the safety bar, because, we're not training to become lifters. We're training to become better athletes for jiu-jitsu. So
exactly,
you don't want to waste all this time, trying to master the back squat when you can put a safety bar on your back and start getting the benefits right out of the gate. So,
right.
Huge tip right there. I think Steve Maxwell was the one. I remember in an interview, he was saying that strength is the one quality that you really can't get on the mats too. You can pick up a lot of other stuff, strength endurance, your cardio, your energy training system, but you can't really get true strength training on the mats. So just to wrap up the whole strength conversation, I think, I think it's makes a lot of sense for the jiu-jitsu athlete to add in strength training.
Yeah. To put a cap on it too, this is something I really learned from Steve as well, is that jiu-jitsu is not like a great health or exercise system in and itself. It's a martial art. It's a fighting system. It has cross benefits, but like you shouldn't do it to like get certain things out of it. Like, yes, you're going to get camaraderie, self-defense and many other things out of it, but you're not going to get like you're not going to do jujitsu and then just pick up a bar and,
Right.
with 450 pounds or something,
Yep.
Yeah.
So getting on to the energy systems development, are there any methods that you really stick to when you're trying to train the different energy systems with your athletes?
Yeah, the number one thing I always start with is making sure the aerobics are really sound. Like the baseline stuff, like can they sustain activity for a long period of time? And like at a real sub-max intensity that doesn't result in spikes in heart rate. And then I do a lot of intervals where I'm challenging people's rest. So once I see that people are very efficient, like just to give an example so people can like kind of visualize it a little better, like I'll use an assault bike. And I like those because they get most of your body into it. And there's there's no skill to it. It's just moving. And it puts out a rough reading of your wattage, like how much power you're creating. That's basically what that's reading. Mm-hmm. And then I have them always hooked up to heart rate monitors. And before all this was going down, I was doing this a lot with Marcos Tinoco, and we would look at his recovery. So I would have him go for 2 minutes, and then I would give him a full 2 minutes to recover. And a guy like that, he's been at it forever. Like after like 1.5 training sessions of that, he got the adaptation. Like in other words, like he recovered perfectly, like it was nothing between every round. And you should, if you go 2 minutes and whatever, like 1-to-1 cardio intervals. But then I start pulling away like your rest as the weeks go by or as the training sessions go by. But it's all dictated by what I see in the heart rate data. So I had to learn a lot about how to read heart rate data. I used to work a lot early in my career with endurance athletes. So I had a lot of exposure to all the different heart rate monitoring, HRV, and these different devices. HRV is less relevant here, but I got to really understand like the positives and the shortcomings of zone training, and understanding that you can have some freaks who can like really sustain high heart rates for a long time. So for me, the magic is in how you recover, because jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of start and stop. For example, like, you might be in like a real scrap with somebody. But then if you get to a better position and score a point, usually you're going to hold for a sec, or the guy might just realize, oh, my guard's passed. So now I'm, like he's got the points. He's I'm in his side control. It's like, let me set up, Yeah. So you need to have that ability to sort of recover. So I always start there. Aerobic is very important because jiu-jitsu, it might develop that a little more in an incomplete way. Where jiu-jitsu people tend to be very good, or in my opinion, is usually like in that middle range, that glycolytic range, because jiu-jitsu is a lot of that. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of like tension release, things that happen like kettlebells, like a lot of kettlebell training, like things that happen in that like minute 30 or less range. Mm-hmm. So I do a lot there as well. Or excuse me, I don't do as much for jiu-jitsu guys in normal times there. But like right now, a lot of the jiu-jitsu guys that I'm still working with like remotely, and the kettlebell classes I do, because they're attended by a lot of jiu-jitsu people, mm-hmm. I make sure I do a lot of glycolytic work, because that's what they're probably missing the most mm-hmm. from the mats. And I would define like glycolytic, basically, if people are listening and they're like, what is all this stuff? Like, your aerobic, you have 3 main energy systems. People delineate it more, mm-hmm. but any activity that you can sustain with just breathing and your heart rate staying reasonable is defined as like your aerobic energy system. And your glycolytic energy system would typically be things that are going to involve like the breakdown of additional substrates, like things in your blood, things in your body to fuel the effort mm-hmm. With oxygen. But oxygen eventually you will get to a point where you can no longer use oxygen to sustain it. And that's typically things that could last up to 3 minutes. And then after that is more of what they call like a phosphagen system. And that's why I like strength training so much, is you get that in the snap. Like if you see like Matheus Lutes, like, boom, like try to pass someone's guard real fast. That's training that phosphagen system. But that doesn't always happen. How many jiu-jitsu matches have you seen that are just like lay and pray,
Yeah.
So,
mm-hmm.
or rolling, just in the gym. So
I think that was great, man, because I think that's one area where the general practitioner kind of misses is understanding that you have to train these different energy systems. You can't just, oh, today's a cardio day. All right, I'm going to go run on a treadmill.
Mhm.
But with that said, I do agree the aerobic energy system is kind of like the granddaddy to me, because if you can improve that, I feel like you're going to start at a better place for the other two energy systems. Would you
Right.
agree?
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, one thing I'm doing when I'm training people's aerobic systems is I'm trying to get them to produce more wattage at a lower heart rate. So they have a higher power output at a lower heart rate. So you're essentially like Lance Armstrong. You could have like some resting heart rate, like less than 40. It's like one pump, boom, it gets your whole body.
Yeah.
That's like just an analogy or just a visual, but absolutely. The more you can do, it's that threshold. It's that aerobic threshold. The more things, if you can move that, it's graphed in a lot of textbooks. If you can do more things below the threshold, you will get tired less quickly. You are stronger. You're everything. You're more powerful. You're just a more complete athlete. You're a more effective human.
And that's a pretty simple energy system to program. There's not a lot that goes into that. Like if someone wanted to start training their aerobic energy system, basically it could be as simple as like, all right, take your resting heart rate in the morning, and then that'll be the caliber of how efficient your heart rate is. If your heart rate is getting better, more efficient, then go out and run 20, 30 minutes 3 times a week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the one thing I would say is, and this is why I love working with combat athletes, and it's the one thing that works against them sometimes, is you have to have the discipline to like not try to just blast off and try to like be sprinting too much. But you're generally right. If you just go out and run for 20 minutes and cap it at 30, you just do it for a jog, it's road work. It's time, and it's time in memoriam. Like it's been tested by combat athletes, like, probably for 100+ years. So, it's worth the investment of a heart rate monitor, but in my opinion, if you take it at all seriously, but just tame your expectations. Cause I've worked with some athletes and gone out for runs with them, and I'm like, slow down. It's not what we're training.
If someone were to, because nowadays you can get a lot of heart rate monitors on your phone and things like that. If you were to go out and just do an aerobic session, where would you want to keep your heart rate at?
Generally, and I just remember it's slightly individual. I would say like 150-ish,
Yeah.
and under. Yeah.
I've heard like the 130 to 150 range. If you can kind of maintain that for 20, 30 minutes, then you're really working the work capacity and the aerobic system. And then the thing is to, keep an eye on your resting heart rate over the next couple of weeks. Is that coming down, to know if you're actually, not just spinning your wheels out there?
Right. Yeah. That would be a good way to do it. Yeah, if you can, if you're doing that at the 130s, like for 20, 30 minutes, that's great. Like you're probably covered. You probably covered that spread already. So that's a good thing. So it's a good thing to maintain. Aerobic stuff that I like also because, or just training energy systems is something I work on, but I usually don't spend forever on with people. Like we go into phases with it, because once you build it, it's easy to maintain if you do what you're supposed to, in my opinion and experience. So if you take 8 weeks to really develop your energy systems, kind of 360, if you work into your program through the rest of the year, the right like checkups on those things, like you're going to keep most of that. But if you don't do it at all, it will go away.
Plus, if you're training jiu-jitsu, you're hitting most of those energy systems while you're on the mat.
Yeah. For the most part, yeah. Everything you do, you hit everything usually, but yeah, definitely jiu-jitsu is a very varied sport. It's one of the things I've been trying to do for a long time is to standardize a lot more of this stuff. It's been like a personal project of mine going back to like 2017 when I got to work with Charles Poliquin firsthand a little bit. But yeah, you're going to be hitting everything and everything you do. Some sports are very much in one realm versus the other. And jiu-jitsu is like a weird one. So it exists everywhere. So it goes back to what I was saying, like be the complete athlete.
Next question for you. Yeah. What would be some of your advice for recovery? I mean, I think this is also a big area that is missed, especially at the competitive level. A lot of guys are just grinding. Like we were talking about earlier, how jiu-jitsu really hasn't gotten to that point like other professional sports have, where, you know, their whole program is dialed in. Jiu-jitsu, there's still this mentality of just like constantly grind, you know, 7 days a week, got to be doing something, got to be, or my opponent's outworking me. Now it's like, okay, let's be a little bit more thoughtful about it. What do you recommend for recovery?
Recovery is a funny one, because to me it's like it's people, they make it too hard sometimes, but then they also they don't do enough of it, like you said. So there's like, it can be hard to find that sweet spot. I mean, you want to find the first things that you can really do for yourself are just making sure you're healthy, number one. So making sure you get enough sleep each night, making sure, and, you know, that's going to look different for everybody too. That's not like my realm of expertise either. So I would consult people who are like sleep experts there. I would make sure, you know, you want to be eating healthy. You don't want your body weight to deviate too much from certain norms, just because I think jiu-jitsu is a sport where you have to have a very efficient vessel. So you want to make sure that there's nothing weighing you down that doesn't need to be there. And I think especially now with what we're going through, you want to be in good health. There's just no way around it. It's something that I've always had at the top of my website, that it's strength and performance through health first. And that's not always the case in performance training. Sometimes it's all about like, get me to X game or get me to this tournament. Yeah. It doesn't by any means necessary. So just covering your spreads there, just using basic common sense there. Another one is eating enough. Again, nutrition is not my field of expertise, but I can tell you most people who train jiu-jitsu eat way too little for how much output they have. They're usually, I mean, this is changing a little now, thank God, but the people were way too obsessed with like low or no carb diets, which might be okay for a little while, but a sport like jiu-jitsu, like to understand energy systems, the glycolytic energy system is going to be pulling substrates that most of which you take from carbohydrates. So once you maybe get down, if say you're overweight, you're on a low carb diet, you're essentially going to be fueling yourself through what you eat and your own flesh vessel. And then when that gets small enough, or you get to a certain point, you know, this is when the hormones come into the picture. You're not going to do that anymore. And then you're just running on E all the time. Yeah. So you have to set yourself up for success before you get on the mat, like by doing all these health, taking all these measures to make sure your health is decent. You make a good point too. Like this is why one athlete who I work with, and we've become very good friends over the years too, Rehan Mutalib, this is one reason he came to me a few years ago is, you know, he said, I don't want to train like an idiot. Like, I feel like 2 times a day, every day, all day, it's just breaking me down. It's breaking everyone else down, whether or not they want to admit it. Like there's a better paradigm. And he knew that I was thinking differently about things because I had worked with some other guys at the gym that were friends with him. And, you know, for us, I really feel like the proof was in the pudding. He's like the consummate student, and he really took to the program. Like we made sure, you know, his diet was in check. He's pretty smart with that stuff anyway. You know, we got him on the right supplements. We got him making sure he's hydrating properly, recovering between sessions, put him through like a crazy worlds camp that year where he did really well. And then now, like at black belt, you know, he won gold at 3 of his first 4 tournaments. He's been involved in a lot of super fights since. I know there might be some stuff coming up. So like, you know, these programs and putting recovery protocols and decent programming, they take a while to catch sometimes, as you probably know, and many people listening might be surprised to know, is that, you know, you have to do these things like consistently. They don't just change in like 2 weeks, you know, and then they allow you and give you more shelf life to work and to keep doing really well in the sport for longer. So if you are someone who can make money or makes money from jiu-jitsu in your body, like, this is important stuff to consider. But if you have more specifics about like recovery, I could get into some of those too, but that's like the first one, and it's easy stuff. It's not sexy stuff. And that's the problem, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's easy to overlook that type of stuff too. Just everything you said was great. I mean, the big takeaway that I'm finding is nutrition. Like that is your best bet for recovery, proper nutrition and sleep, those two things. And then being like dedicated to it, not thinking, oh, it's just an afterthought. No, that's part of the complete program. If you really, especially because you're putting in all this effort on the mat, you're putting in this effort in the gym, you're doing the road work, you're kind of cutting yourself short if you don't pay attention to those other aspects. So you're definitely right. It's going to take some time to adapt them into your routine, but it's definitely going to be well worth the effort.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I also look at it too, like, cause I'm sure people are wondering about certain other, products, supplements, whatever. Like, you always have to remember too, when it's recovery and when it's anything, it's treating the symptoms, and then there's going to the cause. Like what we just talked about is all the cause. It's the core stuff. It's the things that you need to kind of always be doing, but it doesn't mean that you might've not done damage before and you can just ignore whatever's nagging you. So like, I do like percussive therapy for like the guns, basically like the hyper ice.
Oh, right.
I like those for, getting people like warmed up, and also when you're done, like making sure that it can, I guess, help with like different lymphatic drainage. It can help keeping your muscles from getting too tight. And the research is very promising there. And this is just something like we've noticed over the years anyway. So I like simple things like that if you have certain nagging like issues that you need to deal with, but it doesn't mean that like one replaces the other or anything like that.
Part of the protocol. You don't have to get into them too deep, but any supplements that you think are like absolute must for grapplers?
No, I mean, I think there are supplements that are good for your health all around, but like those being, going back to what we were just saying, like you need to make sure your vitamin D levels are good. You need to make sure, you need to make sure you're hydrating enough. So that would be a supplement like in itself, like electrolytes. So if you're not hydrating properly, like A, start with more water, and B, especially in the summer months, you might want to add in some electrolytes. The thing about supplements is that your supplement routine, in my opinion, should never look exactly the same all year round. It's going to change. Like you are a changing individual. So if you're not ready to like go down that path, and most people don't have to, because it's like to me, it's like hedging your bets. There's like, there is a lot of information that shows that, nutritionally, like you should be supplementing a certain amount of X, Y, or Z, depending on your blood test levels. So you should get that done. But if you're not willing to like get blood tests, maybe 2 to 3 times a year, don't bother with a lot of stuff, because you just won't know. You're just shooting in the dark. That's just my opinion, but, and you'll do much more good sleeping and eating well and training smartly. But if you're really trying to get that edge, I mean, yeah, absolutely. There's supplements that we will get into, like, electrolytes are number one, like for people who train a lot, then, and especially if they're training with me then too. There's a lot of reasons for that. The main one being is just that, things are just, your body doesn't work as effectively. Your tissues are not as supple. There's all these other things that are going to happen when you don't have that proper electrolyte balance. I'm a big fan of Stan Efferding, and he's huge on, especially for strength athletes, but jiu-jitsu qualifies too, because you lose so much sweat, is sodium. So that is an electrolyte, but making sure you have enough salt in your diet. So that's like a supplemental strategy that doesn't even require you to go online or anything like that. Right. I also, then it just depends on the athlete from there and the person. If it's, I don't have anything against creatine. I don't have anything against proteins. I have people I would recommend or suggest to people to use them during certain times. of the year, maybe not all the time. It just depends. I think protein supplements and keeping your protein high is pretty important for a weight class sport, especially because your weight fluctuates a lot and you don't want that to be your skeletal muscle. So, and has been shown repeatedly, it seems like, that, if your protein intake is sufficient, there is more muscle sparing. So things like that, simple stuff. There's no like magic bullet,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
100%, man. That was great stuff. So let's wrap it up. What would be your final piece of advice for grapplers who want to get an edge somehow through strength and conditioning, energy system training, proper nutrition, diet? Any one thing that you would say to them?
Plan it out. Just like, remember that if you just kind of go day to day, it's very easy to kind of fall off the wagon or get frustrated, or even if it on the flip side, like on the best of things, like it's easy to get frustrated and be like, why am I doing this again? But if you have a program in front of you, even if it's crude and you wrote it or your buddy wrote it or something, as long as he's not advocating anything crazy, it keeps you on the map, like eyes on the prize. Like you have a goal, maybe two. I don't like to go beyond too many, like have like a million goals all at once. I am a fan of conjugate training and approaching multiple goals or multiple lines of training at the same time. But, we still keep it pretty precise. Like it's one or two things we really have our eye on. So just plan it, have a reason.
Great stuff, man. Have a plan. That's awesome advice. So really appreciate it, Mark.
Absolutely.
Where can people find out more if they want to learn about your training, your methods, or even train with you?
So you can go over to DiSalvotraining.com, my last name. That's where we kind of like house all the main information. And that's also the studio, the gym's website. When things are open again, I obviously invite anybody to come train. Just, let me know ahead of time. It is by appointment only. We also have Instagram at Mark DiSalvo, my name. I post a lot there in normal times. Instagram's a little crowded right now, but the thing I do a lot is a kettlebell class. So we do a live kettlebell class lately. So if you are interested, I know we talked a lot about kettlebells. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 10 a.m., we do a live stream of the kettlebell class. And then the archive of that, if you miss it, gets put on a Patreon that we have set up for the gym right now, which you can find on my website or in the social media. You can subscribe to that if you want to see all the classes. And I've been writing more in depth on there. So I've been posting some blogs to the website because that is what I try to do the most of. But if there's some blogs that, there are some blogs, I should say, that I've been putting more to the Patreon members. So those are the two main places. And then you can just hit me up anytime. There's a lot of ways to do that on both those channels.
Right on, man. I will, I'm going to try to get into one of those kettlebell classes. That sounds really cool. And
yeah, please do.
When this thing clears up, I'll definitely be taking the trip to New York City and checking out the spot and coming to train with you.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to have you. I mean, we're hopefully got some cool stuff planned coming up. So hopefully I would love to have you in and anybody else in.
All right, man. Sounds great. Thank you again so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you, man.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you picked up some good information there from Mark. He's got a ton of experience, as you can tell, and is really knowledgeable when it comes to getting the body ready for combat. If you want to train with Mark, you can actually train at his studio in New York City. He's on West 29th Street. So if you're ever in town, be sure to stop by and check him out. You can also go to his website at DiSalvotraining.com and check him out on Instagram at Mark DiSalvo. So thanks again, guys, for tuning in. If you're enjoying the podcast, I just please ask that you leave a review on iTunes or like and subscribe on YouTube. And as always, you can check us out at seekprogress.com. We've got a bunch of free resources there, including mobility ebooks, conditioning ebooks, a blog that's full of free information on getting your body in the best possible shape for jiu-jitsu. So thanks again, guys, for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.